to contribute to our own success long term, what are the main things we can do?
Do what the doctor tells you in the clinic. Follow your advice. Yeah.
That is good advice. I do that.
Yeah. So a lot of it's all about compliance, I think, and just sticking to the medications as prescribed. As we've sort of learnt in the COVID era, the internet and social media in particular is a very dangerous space to be in. And if you come across anything that sort of challenges what you're doing, I'd refer it back to one of the transplant doctors rather than sort of act on what may be recommended on Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to adhere to the advice of the transplant unit, whether it be the doctors or the nurses. They're all very experienced in dealing with the long-term issues that arise after a transplant. We believe that it's in the patient's best interest to have long-term follow-up through the transplant program. I think one of the things that will come as a consequence of COVID is increased use of telehealth and as a way of following people up. And as you know, as a transplant program that provides a statewide service and also services interstate patients, it can be very challenging for people living in remote centres to come back here for reviews. But I think with the aid of telehealth, that will facilitate, close long-term follow-up of these more isolated patients.
And then diet and exercise, like that obviously plays a major role, but can you take it too far? Like with exercise, can you push it too much after transplant? Have you still got to be mindful of listening to your body?
Yeah, I think it's important to listen to your body. It has a good way of telling you if it's not coping with the stresses you're putting on it. I guess one of the sort of broad principles about heart transplant patients is that because the heart has lost its normal nerve supply, it's slower to respond to physical demands placed on it compared to a normal person in the community. So the corollary to that is that transplant recipients tend not to make good sprinters. They're fine for endurance events, but they're not fast sprinters because of this effect of not having a normal nerve supply to the heart. With exercise, regular exercise, at least 3 days a week for an hour each time, with a warm up and warm down or a cool down is, that we say that to everyone in the community, and that applies just as much to transplant recipients as to the general population. As you indicated earlier, that particularly early on post-transplant, you can have a raging appetite, and a lot of people, who've lost a lot of weight pre-transplant, lost a lot of muscle bulk, it obviously makes sense for them to eat and to exercise to rebuild what they had, before they got sick in the first place. But there's clearly a tendency for a lot of people to gain too much weight post-transplant, and like a lot of things, it's all in moderation. But and we recommend a balanced diet, and generally a Heart Foundation. If you go on the Heart Foundation's website, you will find dietary advice on that. And I know in our transplant information booklets that we give out, there's dietary advice as well.
So essentially, it's not really any different to the general population anyway,
No, there's there's no, you can't have this or you can't have that, or you can't do this or can't do that. You know, we say you should avoid the extremes of physical exertion. So I don't think you should be going into weightlifting championships or things like this. You know, but light exercise, light resistance training is all very good for you.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've had plenty of transplant patients who, you know, before they became sick, they were doing quite heavy physical manual work. And by and large, they can go back to that without any trouble post-transplant.
Yeah, well, for me, it was the opposite in the way that I was able to do so much more post-transplant that I never really could prior to. Like I've felt a lot fitter post-transplant than I ever did. And I didn't know at the time that I was unfit until after transplant. I was like, oh, okay, now now I know.
Now you know what
A lot
normal fitness is.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of, you know, people I'm talking to, transplant patients, is if you grow up with these problems, you don't necessarily notice something's wrong.
Yes.
And then
Yeah, you don't have a normal baseline to compare it to.
Exactly. So for me, post-transplant, it was extremely exciting time. I was struggling to contain myself because I'd been given not just my life back, but so much more as far as exercise capacity and everything else. So